2,600 years ago, a prophet in Babylonian exile wrote down a vision so specific, so detailed, that scholars dismissed it as impossible. He described a massive coalition from the north, led by Persia, attacking a reborn Israel in its ancient homeland. For 26 centuries, that seemed like fantasy, until June 2025, when Israel launched the largest military strike in its history against Iranian nuclear facilities, when Russia deepened its alliance with Tehran, when the exact nations Ezekiel named began, positioning themselves exactly as the ancient text predicted, and when a ritual that hasn't been performed in 2,000 years was rehearsed on a hilltop in Israel, signaling preparations for something that could change everything. What's happening right now isn't just geopolitics. It's prophecy unfolding in real time, and the signs are so visible, so undeniable, that even skeptics are starting to ask the impossible question, are we watching the final countdown? Because here's what nobody's connecting. The events of the past 6 months aren't random, they're sequential, they're building toward something, and every single piece matches prophecies written before the Roman Empire even existed. This isn't about religion. This is about patterns, about historical trajectories written in iron and blood, about ancient warnings that are screaming at us right now if we're willing to listen. Let me show you what's actually happening. June 12, 2025. 3:47 a.m. Jerusalem time. Israeli F-35. Stealth fighters crossed into Iranian airspace undetected. Their target wasn't military bases or weapons depots. It was Natanz, Fordow, Parchin, Iran's nuclear heartland. Within 90 minutes, precision-guided munitions struck 47 separate targets across 3 provinces. Underground centrifuge facilities built into mountains were hit with bunker-busting bombs that penetrated 200 feet of reinforced concrete. Surface-to-air missile batteries that cost Iran billions were destroyed before they could even activate, and Iran's nuclear program, decades in the making, was set back by what analysts estimate to be 10 to 15 years in a single night. This wasn't a raid. This was a declaration. Israel, a nation the size of New Jersey, struck the heart of the Persian Empire and walked away untouched. Iran's response, threats, promises of retaliation, calls for international condemnation, but no action, because they couldn't. The strike exposed something the world already suspected, but Iran desperately tried to hide. Their vaunted military was a paper tiger. Their defense systems were obsolete, and their ability to threaten Israel's existence was suddenly, dramatically reduced. But here's what makes this prophetically significant. It's not that Israel struck Iran. It's that this strike perfectly sets up the exact scenario Ezekiel described 2,600 years ago. Open your Bible to Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 1 through 6. Written around 593 BC, when the Jewish people were captives in Babylon, their temple destroyed, their nation scattered. The prophet receives a vision of a distant future when Israel would be regathered to their land and a massive coalition would attack them. The text names the attackers specifically Magog, which scholars identify as the region north of the Black Sea, modern-day Russia; Persia, which is unambiguously Iran; Kush, ancient Ethiopia and Sudan; Put, which is Libya; Gomer and Beth Togarmah, regions in modern Turkey. And the text says they will come from the uttermost parts of the north, with an army so vast it will be like a cloud covering the land. For centuries, Bible scholars read this and saw an impossibility, because for this prophecy to be fulfilled, 3 conditions had to be met. First, Israel had to exist as a nation in its ancient homeland. That didn't happen for 1,078 years after Ezekiel wrote those words. Second, Persia, which hadn't been a unified nation since Alexander the Great conquered it in 330 BC, would have to re-emerge as a major power hostile to Israel. And third, Russia, a nation that didn't even exist when Ezekiel wrote this, would have to form an alliance with these Middle Eastern nations against Israel. All 3 seemed impossible until they weren't. May 14th, 1948. David Ben-Gurion stands in the Tel Aviv Museum and declares the establishment of the State of Israel. For the first time in nearly 2 millennia, the Jewish people had a nation in their ancestral homeland. Ezekiel 37, the vision of the dry bones, coming to life, seemed to leap off the page. What had been a metaphor became concrete reality. The rebirth of Israel wasn't just remarkable politically, it was unprecedented historically. No other ancient people scattered for 2,000 years ever reconstituted themselves as a nation. The Babylonians gone, the Assyrians vanished, the Philistines extinct, but the Jews, against every historical precedent, against every probability, they returned, exactly as Ezekiel said they would. But prophecy goes beyond just Israel's existence. It requires specific enemies in specific alliances. And that's where 2025 becomes absolutely chilling. In 1979, Iran underwent the Islamic Revolution. The Shah, who had maintained diplomatic relations with Israel, was overthrown. The Ayatollah Khomeini took power and immediately declared Israel the little Satan that must be wiped from the map. For 46 years, Iran has funded, trained, and armed every terrorist organization dedicated to Israel's destruction. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis in Yemen. Iran created what they call the Axis of Resistance, a network of proxy forces surrounding Israel on every border. The ancient Persian Empire, dormant for millennia, re-emerged as Israel's primary existential threat, exactly as Ezekiel predicted. And then there's Russia. In 2015, Russia entered the Syrian civil war on the side of Bashar al-Assad. But they didn't just send military aid. They established permanent military bases. They deployed S-400 anti-aircraft systems. They stationed naval forces in the Mediterranean. For the first time since the Cold War, Russia had a significant military presence in the Middle East, and their alliance with Iran deepened dramatically. Joint military exercises, weapons sales, intelligence sharing, strategic coordination. The northern power and the Persian power, exactly as Ezekiel described, forming an alliance in the lands directly north of Israel. Now add the other nations. Turkey, once Israel's closest Muslim ally, has turned hostile under Erdogan's government. Libya collapsed into chaos and became a haven for militant groups. Sudan, despite recent peace agreements, remains unstable. All the pieces Ezekiel named are on the board. All the alliances are forming. All the conditions are being met. But there's something else happening that might be even more significant. Something that's been in motion for years but accelerated dramatically in 2025. The preparation for the Third Temple. Numbers chapter 19 describes a ritual that seems bizarre to modern readers. God commands Moses to sacrifice a red heifer, a female cow that is entirely red, without a single hair of another color, and has never been yoked. The heifer is to be burned completely, and its ashes mixed with water to create a purification solution. This solution was essential for the ritual purification of priests serving in the temple. Without it, the temple service couldn't function. It was a requirement of the law, a ceremonial necessity that had to be fulfilled. Here's the problem. Since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, no red heifer ceremony has been performed. Because there was no temple, no priesthood, no need for ritual purification, the Jewish people have been in exile from their temple service for 1,155 years. According to Jewish tradition, only 9 red heifers have ever been sacrificed in all of history. Moses performed the first. Ezra performed the last around 400 BC. The Talmud says that the 10th red heifer will be sacrificed when the Messiah comes. For 2,000 years, red heifers qualifying for the ceremony simply didn't exist. Cattle breeding had made pure red cows virtually impossible to find. Jewish scholars searched for them without success. It became a symbol of something unattainable, a reminder that the temple era was closed until 2022, when 5 red heifers were born in Texas and transported to Israel under the supervision of the Temple Institute, an organization dedicated to rebuilding the Jewish temple. These weren't just any cows. They were examined by rabbinical authorities and declared kosher for the ceremony. For the first time in 2 millennia, Israel had red heifers that could potentially be used for the temple purification ritual. July 1st, 2025. On a remote hilltop in northern Israel, something extraordinary happened. A practice run of the red heifer ceremony was performed. Not the actual ritual, but a rehearsal. Testing the procedures, training the participants, preparing for the real thing. The ceremony requires specific conditions. It must be performed on the Mount of Olives, east of the Temple Mount. The heifer must be entirely consumed by fire. The ashes must be collected in a state of ritual purity. Every detail specified in Numbers 19 must be followed exactly. The rehearsal sent shockwaves through the Middle East because everyone understands what it means. If the red heifer ceremony is performed, the next step is rebuilding the temple. And if the temple is rebuilt on the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock currently stands, it could trigger a war unlike anything the region has ever seen. Hamas even cited the red heifers as partial justification for their October 7, 2023 attack on Israel. In their propaganda, they claimed Israel was preparing to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and replace it with the Third Temple. The red heifers, in their narrative, were proof of this plan. Whether this was genuine concern or cynical manipulation doesn't matter. What matters is that the red heifers have become a symbol of apocalyptic significance to billions of people across 3 faiths. But here's what makes this prophetically critical. The Apostle Paul, writing in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, describes a figure he calls the man of lawlessness, who will appear before Christ's return. Verse 4 says, "He opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God." Notice the key phrase, "in the temple of God." For this prophecy to be fulfilled, there must be a temple, a functioning temple, a temple where this figure can enter and defile. For 1,955 years, that prophecy seemed impossible. There was no temple, no prospect of a temple. The Temple Mount was controlled by Muslims who would never allow it. But now there are red heifers in Israel. Now there are priests being trained. Now there are temple vessels being created. Now there are architectural plans for the Third Temple sitting in files in Jerusalem. The impossible is becoming possible. The distant is becoming imminent. And there's another sign that's literally written in the sky, one that's causing even secular scientists to take notice. On March 13th, 2025, a total lunar eclipse occurred. The moon turned blood red for 84 minutes, visible across North America, South America, Europe, and Africa. This wasn't unusual. Lunar eclipses happen regularly, but this one fell on Purim, a Jewish holiday celebrating the deliverance of the Jewish people from genocide in ancient Persia. The symbolism was impossible to miss. On a holiday commemorating victory over Persia, the moon turned blood red, and Iran, modern Persia, was preparing for confrontation with Israel. Then, on September 7th, 2025, it happened again. Another total lunar eclipse, another blood moon, this one lasting 82 minutes, visible over Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. And it occurred exactly 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, a time of prayer, repentance, and spiritual preparation. 2 blood moons in 6 months, both falling on or near significant Jewish holy days, both occurring during the most volatile period in Israel's modern history. The Bible speaks about celestial signs preceding the day of the Lord. Joel chapter 2, verse 31. "The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. Acts chapter 2 verse 20 repeats the same prophecy. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the day of the Lord comes, the great and magnificent day. Are these the signs Joel and Peter described? Maybe, maybe not, but the timing is remarkable. And when celestial events align with geopolitical crises and prophetic preparations, people pay attention. Let me show you the convergence, because it's not just one sign. It's multiple signs occurring simultaneously. It's what statisticians call a low probability cluster. Any single event might be coincidental, but when multiple unlikely events happen in sequence, the probability of pure chance drops exponentially. Israel exists as a nation after 2,000 years of dispersion. Check. Iran, ancient Persia, is Israel's primary enemy. Check. Russia has formed an alliance with Iran in the region directly north of Israel. Check. Turkey has shifted from ally to adversary. Check. The nations Ezekiel named are aligned exactly as he described. Check. Red heifers exist in Israel for the first time in 2,000 years. Check. Preparations for the Third Temple are actively underway. Check. Blood moons are occurring on Jewish holy days during crisis periods. Check. Israel has struck Iran's nuclear program, potentially provoking the massive retaliation Ezekiel describes. Check. Each individual element could be dismissed, but all of them together? That's not coincidence. That's pattern. That's sequence. That's the kind of convergence that makes even skeptical scholars start asking uncomfortable questions. Dr. Randall Price, archaeologist and biblical scholar, has been studying temple preparations for 3 decades. In a 2024 interview, he stated, "We are closer to the rebuilding of the temple than at any time in the past 2,000 years. The theological preparation is complete. The political will is growing. The physical resources are available. We are one catalyzing event away from it happening. One event, one crisis, one shift in the geopolitical landscape. That's all it would take, and the Iran strike might be exactly that catalyzing event. Because Iran cannot afford to appear weak. Their entire regional strategy is built on the perception of strength, of deterrence through proxies and threats. Israel's strike shattered that perception. It exposed Iran's vulnerability. It showed the world that the emperor has no clothes. Iran must respond, not because they want to, but because they have to. Their credibility in the Islamic world depends on it. Their control over their proxy networks requires it. Their survival as a theocratic regime demands it, but they can't respond alone. They tried that with direct missile attacks in October 2024 and April 2025, and Israel's defenses neutralized them. So what's the next move? Build a coalition, rally allies, create overwhelming force, exactly what Ezekiel 38 describes, a massive multinational attack designed to destroy Israel once and for all. Verse 8 says this invasion will happen in the latter years. Verse 16 specifies it will be in the latter days. The Hebrew phrase used is Be'acharit Hayamim, which consistently refers to the end times, the final period, before God's ultimate intervention in human history. And here's the part that should make every person, religious or not, pay very close attention. Ezekiel doesn't just predict the invasion, he predicts the outcome. Verses 18 through 23 describe God himself intervening to destroy the invading armies, not through Israeli military power, through supernatural catastrophe, earthquakes, confusion causing the armies to turn on each other, plague, torrential rain, hailstones, fire and brimstone. The text says, "So I will show my greatness and my holiness and make myself known in the eyes of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord." This is divine intervention on a scale unseen since the Exodus. This is God making his existence undeniable. This is the end of ambiguity, the end of doubt, the end of the age where faith requires belief without sight. If Ezekiel 38 is fulfilled as written, The entire world will witness God acting in history in a way that cannot be explained, rationalized, or dismissed. Are we there yet? Are we at the threshold of the Ezekiel 38 war? Most prophecy scholars say no, not yet. The invasion described in Ezekiel 38 occurs when Israel is dwelling securely, which verse 11 specifies as living in unwalled villages without bars or gates. That doesn't describe Israel today. Israel is one of the most heavily militarized nations on earth. They live under constant threat. They have Iron Dome missile defense. They have compulsory military service. They are the opposite of dwelling securely. So what has to happen first? Most scholars believe Israel must achieve a period of peace and security before the Ezekiel 38 invasion. How? Probably through a peace agreement. A treaty that seems to guarantee Israel's security. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 describes a figure who shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, which in prophetic literature typically means 7 years. This covenant, most scholars believe, is the agreement that creates the false sense of security that allows the Ezekiel 38 invasion. We're not there yet, but we're closer than we've ever been. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations. Saudi Arabia is considering joining. Peace agreements that seemed impossible a decade ago are now reality. The framework for a comprehensive Middle East peace deal exists. It would take a charismatic leader, a skilled negotiator, someone who could broker the impossible to bring it to fruition. The Bible calls that figure the Antichrist, the man who brings peace and then breaks it, the one who makes himself God in the temple. I know what you're thinking. This sounds like end times. Hysteria. This sounds like the people who've been saying Jesus is coming soon for 2,000 years and have been wrong every single time. I get it. Prophecy speculation has a terrible track record. Harold Camping predicted the rapture in 1994 and again in 2011. Wrong both times. The Y2K predictions of apocalypse in 2000. Wrong. The Mayan calendar ending in 2012. Wrong. The list of failed predictions is embarrassingly long. But here's the difference. Those predictions were based on date setting, numerology, subjective interpretations of vague texts. What we're looking at now isn't date setting, it's pattern recognition. It's observable events matching specific biblical prophecies with remarkable precision. It's not saying Jesus is coming on this exact date. It's saying the conditions described in ancient prophecy for the end times are being fulfilled in our lifetime in ways that have never happened before. Jesus himself warned against date setting. Matthew 24:36 says, "But concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Nobody knows the exact time." But Jesus also said in verse 33, "So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates." We can't know the day or the hour, but we can recognize the season. We can see the signs. We can observe the patterns. And the pattern right now is undeniable. Israel exists. Ancient enemies are aligned. Temple preparations are underway. Celestial signs are occurring. Geopolitical tensions are at breaking point. The stage is set. The actors are in position. The script written 2,600 years ago is being followed with eerie accuracy. So what do we do with this information? How do we respond to the possibility, even the probability, that we're living in prophetically significant times? First, we stay grounded. Prophecy obsession can become spiritually unhealthy. Jesus didn't call us to spend all our time decoding revelation. He called us to love God and love our neighbors, to feed the hungry, to care for the sick, to pursue justice, to live faithfully. Prophecy awareness should motivate holy living, not paralyze speculation. Second, we pay attention. Jesus criticized the religious leaders of his day for not recognizing the signs of the times. Luke 12:56. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? Being aware of what's happening in Israel, understanding biblical prophecy, watching global events isn't conspiracy theorizing. It's biblical literacy. It's taking scripture seriously. Third, we share hope. If we're approaching the end times, that's not cause for despair. It's cause for hope, because the end times aren't just about judgment, they're about redemption. They're about God finally making all things right. They're about a world without war, without suffering, without death. Revelation 21:4 promises, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. That's the promise. That's the hope. That's what the signs are pointing toward. Not destruction for its own sake, but transformation. Not the end of everything, but the beginning of everything we were created for. The red heifers in Israel aren't just cows. They're symbols of preparation. The Iran strike isn't just a military operation. It's a shift in the prophetic timeline. The blood moons aren't just astronomical events, they're celestial announcements. Everything is accelerating, everything is converging, and we're here to witness it. Ezekiel 38 describes an invasion that hasn't happened yet but could happen any time. The third temple described in 2 Thessalonians doesn't exist yet, but could be built within years. The peace agreement described in Daniel 9 hasn't been signed yet, but could be negotiated tomorrow. We're in the space between prophecy declared and prophecy fulfilled. We're in the tension between what was written and what will be. And that space, that tension, is where we live right now, watching, waiting, hoping, knowing that every prophecy fulfilled is one more confirmation that Scripture is true, that God is real, that history is moving toward a predetermined end. 2,600 years ago, Ezekiel saw our time. He described our nations. He named our enemies. He predicted our conflicts. And he promised that when it all comes to fulfillment, when the final pieces fall into place, when the last sign appears, God will intervene. Not as a metaphor, not as a symbol, but as reality. Tangible, visible, undeniable reality. Are we there yet? Not quite, but we're closer than we've ever been. And every day brings us one step closer to the moment when prophecy becomes history and faith becomes sight. The signs are visible. The patterns are clear. The countdown has begun. And the question isn't whether prophecy will be fulfilled. It's whether we'll be ready when it is. Watch the news from Israel. Pay attention to Iran. Notice the alliances forming, see the temple preparations advancing, observe the celestial signs appearing, and understand that what you're witnessing isn't random, it's planned, it was written, and it's unfolding exactly as the prophet said it would. The prophecy of Israel begins now, and we're all witnesses to something that generations before us longed to see, but never did. The final act, the closing chapter, the moment when ancient words become present reality and the God who wrote history finally reveals himself to a world that thought he was silent. Get ready, because if Ezekiel was right about everything else, and he was, then what comes next will change everything forever.